Welcome to the Spheres of Spirit with Nancy Myers, aka the Lady of the Light. Nancy will discuss the everyday magic and wisdom of spirit which surrounds each of us, waiting to be discovered. She will share some of her remarkable orb photos, proving that our angels, guides, loved ones in spirit, and even pets surround us and guide us in our physical world. During this episode, Nancy will discuss one of the many spheres or aspects of spirit available to us based on her orb photography. She will also share a special channeled message from her guide, Leonini, and do an oracle card reading to help guide you along your personal spiritual adventure. And now, here is your host, orb photographer, author, medium, and speaker, Nancy Myers.
Hi, welcome. I am your host, Nancy Myers. And today we are going to be talking about a sphere of spirits that is probably not really well known. And we're going to be doing that with my special guest, Hazel Martin. Hi, Hazel.
Hi, Nancy. Such a pleasure to be here with you today.
Thank you. I'm really excited about today's show. Hazel, full disclosure, is my mentor and teacher, and she is a medium extraordinaire. And one of the things that we're going to talk about that she does is physical mediumship. But first, I want you to get to know Hazel a little bit. So, Hazel, can you tell the audience a little bit about who you are, how long you've been doing this, etc.?
Yes, of course. And thank you, Nancy. And good afternoon, everybody. And I hope you're all already having a great day. So I've been working as a medium for just over 20 years now. And but my interests in spiritualism and mediumship started well before that. Actually, I was raised in a family where mediumship was a kind of norm. It was spoken about and understood. That we continued, and yet the funny thing about that is my mother brought me up with that understanding, of course, because her mother had brought her up with that understanding. But it wasn't actually until my grandmother passed that we found out that she too had worked as a medium, but she'd kept it very quiet for most of her life. So even my mother didn't know, even though she'd been raised with the understanding of spirit.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. So my grandmother had been a working medium and a trance medium, which was a wonderful thing. So I always felt like I was very lucky to have at least some understanding or awareness of being brought up in a family that at least spoke about those things. And
for generations.
Absolutely. And there are lovely memories from my mother where she talks about for example, me getting called into school when I was 5 years old, and apparently we'd just started, as you do in school for little ones, we'd started on a project to do with ancient Egypt, and the school called my mother in and said, "Oh, would you come in if possible, please? We'd like to speak to you." She's thinking, okay, that's fine. So the teacher says, "Oh, it's been very interesting. We've been doing a project on ancient Egypt," she said, and we along the wall, apparently, obviously I don't remember this, but along all the wall was all the hieroglyphs and the things that you'd expect for young children to be looking at and learning. And she said, she said, has Hazel ever known anything about this? Or, she's very young, would she have experienced? And my mum's like, "No, not at all," thinking, why am I here? And the teacher says, "Well, it's just that something remarkable happened." And she said, when we started looking at the hieroglyphs, she said Hazel could read every one of them and understood what all of them meant. Which
wow.
So I don't remember any of that. I can only wish I was that gifted nowadays. But of course, when we're young children, we're very open to the realms of spirit, and we're very much in contact with the realms of spirit, of course. So I guess things had already started early.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is great. But I didn't really start onto my kind of spiritual journey until my mid-20s, and I started reading, things and getting interested in all sorts of things that you do when you start on this wonderful spiritual path. You start looking at everything, don't you?
Yes.
Which I think is a really exciting time, when we start on that pathway. And So, and I started to have a look at all sorts of things, and I ended up finding and stumbling across a local spiritualist church, and thinking, okay, what's that's about? And actually, the day that I found them, they were actually having an open day, and somebody was doing a demonstration of mediumship, and then there were little workshops, and I thought, okay, I'm going to go and do that, and the rest is kind of history, if I'm totally honest. I ended up thinking, I think I could probably do this. So I'd be really interested to give it a go. And within a few months, really, I'd made some good acquaintances, and I had some people who were able to advise me. And I didn't really sit in circle, if I'm honest. I kind of did some studying on my own. But I had a good mentor, and I had somebody who was very good with some practical knowledge for me. And he kind of said, you need to get out there and start working with your mediumship. And that was it, just over 20 years ago. And I feel really fortunate, that I've been able to be a medium for this amount of time. But it's only actually been in the last couple of years where I've been able to do it as, if you like, my main focus, as I was working full time for the last 18 years and never really wanted for it to be a job. I still don't. But the joy and the experiences that I've had being a medium for the last 20 years are just, it's brought me unknown happiness and knowledge, in my life, for which, well, I can never thank Spirit
Yes.
enough,
Yeah.
the journey that I've been on, and of course continue to be on. And and the biggest part of this learning experience for me is that although I may be 20 years down the line, I'm still learning every single day, in my own mediumship, in my own unfoldment of my spirit. So it's just such a wonderful journey to be taken, and I'm sure your listeners who are undertaking those journeys for themselves totally understand that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most amazing things about doing this is what Spirit shows us each and every day. They show us what we're able, where we're at. And as we progress, they progress. And it's really quite
Absolutely.
amazing. So there's mediumship.
Yeah.
And mediumship, that most people think of is you go sit in front of a medium and, the medium will contact your loved one and bring forth messages. And
Yeah.
that is an amazing thing in itself. And so healing for both, the spirit and the sitter. But then there's a thing called, and that's called mental mediumship. And
Yeah,
then there's something called, what we're going to talk about today, is physical mediumship. So
absolutely.
how would you define physical mediumship? What is it?
Yeah, and I really accept as well that for some people may know quite a lot about physical mediumship, and some people may never have heard of it. They might not even know, and there's a reason why they might not know, which we'll probably talk about a little bit later. But if I was to try and do a definition of physical mediumship, it really is a form of communication, or I would say collaboration with the spirit world, um, in um, in in an attempt or in a situation that actually involves the medium or the group of people working with spirit to produce actual physical phenomena which is visible to all. And so it literally, as it sounds, is you're creating an environment for spirit to work with you where they can produce different aspects of physical phenomena. And the types of phenomena you might experience in a physical mediumship environment can be vast. Actually, I have to say that you might have lots of loud taps or noises in the room, or bangs. That's a very common aspect within a physical mediumship environment. You might get something called independent direct voice phenomena, which is we could talk for hours on that on its own, I have to tell you that. But that's when spirit are able to create a voice box out of nowhere in air from a form of ectoplasm, which again, people, if they've watched Ghostbusters, they might have heard that, you know what I mean, or whatever.
Yeah.
And and you can get all sorts of things happening. You can get a very common phenomena within the seance room is levitation of objects in the room. And again, that is used, that is often, or historically, I should say, because physical mediumship has evolved and changed like it should do. But historically, ectoplasm was used for the levitation or the movement or the creation of any phenomena in the room. And that can be from paraphernalia that you have in the room, and I can talk about that in a little bit more detail, or it can be to big heavy objects like big wooden tables in the room, or it can it can on very rare occasions be actual people in the room, which, you know, I'm kind of have this rule with spirit, like, whatever you do, don't levitate me, because that will scare me, you know. So we kind of have this line, like, we're not going to cross.
Let me stop you there, because what you just have said sounds like that's not possible. So I want to bring up, Chris, if I can, my first picture. And this is me in Egypt. And I'm standing in front of the Luxor temple, and you can see the orbs there, which what I do is kind of physical mediumship.
Absolutely.
But the quote that I have there is, the only way to discover the limits of possible is to go beyond them to the impossible. And that's from Arthur C. Clarke, and you might know him as author of 2001 Space Odyssey. So thank you very much, Chris. So the if this sounds impossible, it's not. It's not.
No. But let me tell you, my very first experience of sitting in an environment.
How did you get into this? Yeah, how did you?
Yeah. Okay. Well, it was partly through my interest of, once I'd started looking into mental mediumship and developing that. Mostly some of the people that I was heavily involved with at the time, with regard to spiritualist churches and mentors, you know, we'd get talking, and I have to say, I am by nature an incredibly inquisitive person, and I love to learn. So, and I'm also a massive reader. So I'm one of these people who, if I delve into the world of spiritualism, I want to know everything there is to know. You know, I don't want to just know what's there. I want to know everything, and I kind of sort of started looking into it and hearing about it, and I kept thinking, wow, you know, like you and like most other people, I have to tell you now, even though I'm a working medium and I've been doing this for many, many years, and I've seen and experienced some of the most phenomenal things, I'm always highly skeptical, and that is a really good place to be as a human being, because I'm very much like, well, unless I see it with my own eyes, you know, I can see the pictures, I can hear people's stories, but I need to see that. I need to experience it for myself. And I think that's right for everybody. Yeah. I think that's really important, that we all find our own truth, you know, we have to do that. And I got invited along to somebody who was holding, now quite often you'll get them heard, you'll hear them being called seances. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people will know about seances of the Victorian era and post-Victorian era, which is when physical mediumship actually really started and developed. So sometimes
that was what, back in the mid 1800s? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, mid to late 1800s, very, very much. Okay. And most of the kind of, if you like, pioneers of physical mediumship, or the very well-known physical mediums, were all kind of working around the 1920s to between the 1920s and the 1950s, okay, you know, where we saw the bulk of that. And I'll talk about some of those pioneers a little bit later. But I was so intrigued that, can this really be possible? And in my mind, I thought, well, if it is, then surely that is the ultimate proof. Yeah. The ultimate proof of spirit survival and the survival of life after physical death. Because I thought, if spirit are able to work in a way that produces phenomena that is beyond the scientific realms of possibility and understanding, then surely that you cannot witness or experience something like that and not believe. So, you know, I got invited once to go and sit with a wonderful, still current physical medium, an English chap called Scott Milligan, and I'm sure some of you guys in the US will have heard of Scott. Some of you will have, some of you won't. And at the time, Scott had started developing his physical mediumship from about the age of 16.
Wow.
I got invited. He was developing his physical mediumship, and I got invited to go and be a sitter just one night. And
that means just to sit. So for my US audience,
so let me explain what the room would be like. Let me explain.
And I need to tell people that you obviously are in England.
Yes, that's right. Absolutely. In case you didn't know.
So Spiritualist church are more common there, and seances are much more common, and so is physical mediumship. We here in the US are way behind.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It is a lot more common, although dwindling very, very much in the UK. But what you'd expect as well in a seance room, let's use that term, or a room being set up for physical mediumship, is so predominantly you would have one medium who is chosen to be the physical medium. And essentially the role of that medium within this environment is to channel spirit in the way that they would do in other, in mental mediumship, in trance mediumship. But essentially they are just allowing themselves to be used for energy and to produce the right energy and if you like, phenomena that can be produced in order for spirit to manifest things, to manifest spirit in form. That was another thing of physical mediums of the past, full ectoplasmic manifestation of spirit talking to you, shaking your hand, things that will blow your mind. And historically, physical mediums have always worked in a dark room, completely black room, or sometimes with red light. And there was a reason for that, because ectoplasm, being a substance that is drawn from the physical medium's body. Now, this is when it all gets a little bit yucky, if I'm totally honest, because people are like, I don't like the sound of that.
Yeah.
and I'm sure it's what put a lot of people off from saying, I think I'd like to develop into being a physical medium. So ectoplasm, there's all sorts of schools of thought on ectoplasm and what it's made of, where it comes from, as you can imagine. I don't believe there is one definitive answer yet. It might be something that we never know. But essentially, when you sit and develop physical mediumship, that is something that's being developed to produce it within your physical body. And historically, spirit used to use that, build that in your physical body, and they would pull the ectoplasm out of any orifice. Don't think too much into that, because that's where madness lies. You understand? Right. However, absolutely. So they would pull ectoplasm, and traditionally it is more common to come out of the nose, the ears, the mouth. Right. All right. So traditionally, but it can be pulled from anywhere in the body.
So people sitting in the circle would see this substance come out of the medium.
Absolutely. Wow. Absolutely. Okay. Yes. So that in itself would be mind-blowing. Correct.
Yeah.
So so you would have to have as well a group of sitters, because without the sitters, it is very unlikely that a medium is going to be able to develop to produce physical phenomena. And your sitters are there for two reasons. They are there to give energy, obviously, into the room, to provide their energy so that spirit can also use that. But predominantly, they are actually there to give energy to the physical medium and to assist in their development. So, and this is another reason why a lot of people don't develop as physical mediums, and historically have chosen not to, because that development can take a hell of a long time, and there is a dedication that comes with developing physical mediumship. So here's an example. You may sit regularly once or twice a week with your group for, say, an hour and a half at a time. You might have to sit like that for 5-6 years. Wow. Before anything starts to happen. Wow. So as you can see, and especially in today's world where we order something from Amazon and it's with us within 2 hours, you know what I mean? Yeah. A lot of people don't have the patience to sit for that type of phenomena, and they don't have the patience to develop. But of course, life was very different back in the early 1900s. I always laugh and I said, well, there was no TV, there was no social media. You know what I mean? People were having to find other things to do.
They had the time, yeah.
Yeah, but in essence, people did have the time. They did have the time. So you're sitting.
You started to say why it was in the dark, and also, is it
Yeah.
dangerous for the medium to do this?
It can be. And so essentially, ectoplasm, the reason it used to have to be in the dark is because ectoplasm is light sensitive. And so, for example, if ectoplasm has been extracted from the body and used within the seance room, which it is still used, and say somebody did something daft like turn a light on, do you know what I mean? Or there was accidentally some light introduced into the room, the ectoplasm will very quickly snap back into the medium's body. Now, this at best will cause burns on the body and sometimes internal damage.
Wow.
Or worst case scenario, and there were two mediums of the past who had issues with this happening with ectoplasm, and they both ended up dying as a result of their injuries. And there was a lady called Helen Duncan and a materialization medium called Alec Harris. So historically,
that's the book I read.
Oh, there it is.
This is a fascinating book, people.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Alec Harris, one of the true pioneers of physical mediumship, a wonderful manifestation medium. He was reported and it was witnessed at one time by sitters and people who came to visit his circle once he developed to have 15 separate materializations of 15 different spirit people in one evening, in one sitting, one after the other.
So when you say materializations, the ectoplasm comes out.
Absolutely.
And either pools or whatever it does.
Absolutely.
And then it forms into a life-size person.
Absolutely.
Who walks around and talks.
Absolutely. I know, right? I often when I talk about physical mediumship, I'm often so mindful that unless you have experienced this with your own eyes, people would be like, cut her off, you know what I mean? She's lost her mind. And again, I always say to people, don't believe it until you see it.
Exactly.
I've never asked anyone to believe that, but all of this has happened on many occasions historically, and is still able to happen in this aspect of physical phenomena. Things have changed very much over the years, which we would want it to. Spirit, of course, want to evolve their work. They want us to evolve as mediums as well. And back in the 1990s, there was a group that actually was set up in Norfolk in the UK called the Skull. That's SCOLE, the Skull Experimental Group. And they were instructed by Spirit to start sitting for physical phenomena in a slightly different way that didn't involve a specific physical medium, and also wasn't going to be an area where ectoplasm was produced, because Spirit said we are able now to start working on using energy in a different way, so we do not have to pull it from a medium's body. So and that there's some wonderful stuff out there on the work done by the Skull Group, and to be fair, they've changed a lot of the way that current physical mediums sit. There's a lot of physical mediums and circles that started as a result of the Skull Group who now choose to sit that way rather than what I call the old way. But people, you'll tend to find that people who are now developing or practicing their physical mediumship will choose which way they feel inclined to sit, or they might be asking their spirit team, which way do you want us to sit, depending on who you've got working with you and what they're able to do. But things have evolved in that way. So there is, if you like, a safer option.
It's almost like when it started, back in the 1800s. It's like Spirit had to get our attention. Here, we're going to do this remarkable thing. But I also read, and I think physical mediumship kind of got a bad rap, was, because it was done in the dark and it was prone to people coming in, frauds.
Oh, without a doubt. And let me tell you, from the beginning of the development of physical mediumship, and bear in mind, a wonderful thing is really physical mediumship, or if we look at the recognized physical mediumship, that started in America in the 1880s in Hydesville with the Fox sisters, because it was physical phenomena that was being experienced with those taps and raps and that communication. So really that was the start of what we might recognize. There are earlier reports of it things happening before that, but if we look at it, it starts there in America.
Yeah, that's when it started in America. But I think I had a couple of people a little bit earlier that were well known
and
in England.
There was a book. Yeah, there was a book written by a gentleman called Alan Kardec back in about 1850 something, and that was called the Book of Spirits, I believe. And there was already mention of it back there, so I'm sure it had already been around. But if you like, that was the first really out there or known phenomena for physical mediumship. So the difficulty with any aspect of mediumship, but especially physical mediumship, is the amount of fraud that has been committed since day one. Yeah. And I tell you now, more strongly than ever, is still being committed today, unfortunately. And this is why you no longer see physical mediums publicly displaying their physical mediumship, because there are very few people now who are developing their physical mediumship because of the time and the dedication and the patience
and the danger, I would think. Yeah,
absolutely. And finding the right sitters who are committed to you, that's the other thing as well. And because over the last, I'm going to say easily in the last 10 to 15 years across the UK and the US and some other European countries, unfortunately, there have been people who call themselves physical mediums and are still doing that, who quite frankly aren't physical mediums. But there's a lot of money in this. So of course, just like it was back in the early 1900s, it was no different. Yeah. You are going to get your frauds. But unfortunately, what happens now is you have a lot of genuine, wonderful physical mediums who quite simply won't come out of, I call it out of hiding, won't bring it to the public, because they're just going to be tarred with the same brush, which I totally understand. So which is why, if anything, physical mediumship has now gone back underground.
Well, yeah, and the people that are doing it, I think maybe you'd agree with me, these are people that are truly in service. They're not doing it for money or for celebrity.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, we have to take a quick break, but when we come back, I want to talk about your experiences and what you've seen and what you can share. So we'll be right back.
OMTimes TV. The story told in Entering the Light Fantastic, Discovering Life After Life Through Orbs, is about Nancy Meyer's spiritual and emotional rising from the devastating ashes of loss caused by the sudden and unexpected passing of her son Robbie. Just like the legend of the reborn phoenix, Nancy's life purpose and focus was transformed. With the help from her son in spirit, Nancy found herself providing proof through orbs that our souls do not die with our bodies. In her second book, Encircled by the Light Fantastic, A Deeper Journey into the Light with Orbs, Nancy continues chronicling her path of gaining spiritual knowledge and expanding acceptance of what is possible, while traveling to many sacred and ancient sites around the world. She shares these experiences with you along with her photographs of remarkable spirit encounters. Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. OMTimes Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, OMTimes offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an OMTimes magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on OMTimes TV and broadcasting it across the extensive OMTimes radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. OMTimes. Open yourself to the possibilities.
Is it time yet?
It's time.
Let's start time for dinner.
Oh, terrific.
Pasta dinner.
Donating pet food is one of the many ways you can help families in your community. Pets and people belong together. Learn more at petsandpeopletogether.org.
And welcome back. You know, I tell my audience I always do my shows from personal experience, and I've had some personal experience real quick because this is a cute story. Part of, or one of the aspects of physical mediumship you mentioned was table tipping. And I was in a workshop with Mavis Patilla, and we stood in a circle, and 5 of us put our hands on this pretty heavy wooden table. And, you know, you laugh, you sing, you raise the vibration, and pretty soon the table took off. It didn't just rock. We had to run to keep up with it. And as soon as we took our hands off, it stopped. It was the most amazing thing I had ever witnessed. But if you can, please share. Now, you said you went to this one, you started to tell us the story of your first physical mediumship, and then take it from there.
Yeah, okay. So my very first experience, I'd never sat in anything like that before, didn't know what to expect. I can tell you, I was pretty scared because I had no idea what was going to happen. And, you know, the conditions in the Saints room, I want to say as well, you know, should be, there should be really good, strict conditions as well. So, for example, you know, I sit now as a physical medium, developing my physical mediumship. You know, I'm tied in, I'm cable tied to the chair. Do you know what I mean? So that
Why are you cable tied?
So that nobody could be accusing me of faking anything, or do you know what I mean? Moving, coming out of my chair, anything like that. So, you know, it's all done to ensure genuine phenomena. Yeah, there was this first time, and I will never forget, because it was about 5 minutes in. Of course, you're sitting in a dark room, and there's about 5 of us. And I'm like, I have no idea what's going to happen, but I'm just open-minded. And out in the middle of the room, which felt above my head, was this loud, discarnate voice that started talking, and I was like, well, unless there's someone hanging from the ceiling, you know what I mean? I don't quite know how this is gonna how that's happened. And then there was a big sheet of wood on the floor that they used to have, like pieces of paper and pens that spirit could write with. And all of a sudden that started, I could feel something at my feet, like butting up against my foot, as if it was tapping me. And I realized that they were pushing the wood, you know, to me. And so there was all sorts of things like that had happened in that night. And I've got to tell you, I didn't sleep for 2 weeks after that night, because not only was I kind of terrified when I came out, like, but I just couldn't believe what I'd experienced. My brain literally couldn't commute with the experience that I'd had, because, of course, I'd been told for all of my 30 years, this is not possible.
Exactly.
This is not possible. You know, inanimate objects cannot move. You know what I mean? They can't fly around the air and all of this type of stuff. So anyway, about a year or so after that, I got invited to join a trance development group with a very, very good friend of mine who had been a mentor for me. And he is a very, very well-known UK working medium and teacher. I'm not going to mention his name because I want to keep his confidentiality, but I do have permission to talk about some of the experiences in the group.
Okay.
So we started sitting for trance development. That was all going beautifully. And one day he just said, if everyone's okay with it, I think Spirit are wanting us to change this into a physical group. And would you mind being the sitters? And we're like, oh yeah, we want some of that good stuff. Let's see if it happens. And we were very lucky because only after a few months we'd started to get physical phenomena. And I was very fortunate to sit in this circle for the best part of 4 years, once a week for 4 years. So I got to not only see the unfoldment and the development of this medium, I got to see the spirit team unfold with their development, because of course they start small, and once they've got used to working with the medium and the medium's developing that aspect and the sitters are working with good energy, anything's possible. And the first things that often happen, or certainly happened in this circle, is you have things out in the room. Usually in the room you will have like a table, and you will have a seance trumpet. Now, some of you people may be familiar with that. Some of you might not. Essentially, it's just a cone made of either like a very light aluminium, or sometimes it can be cardboard, a thick cardboard, that is probably about 20 inches tall, and it's open from the top to the bottom, but it's cone shaped. And that's used for two reasons in the seance room. One, they like to levitate that and fly that around the room, which is wonderful. But sometimes they'll use it to amplify a voice through. So they might put it up to a voice box that they've built of ectoplasm to amplify the voice through, like a speaker, like a megaphone.
Okay.
So often you'll have that. Quite often it's common to have something like little ping pong balls that you paint with fluorescent paint so that they're glow in the dark, so you can see everything if it moves. We also had a bell. We had a very big old hand bell that was solid brass, very, very, very heavy. And we had a couple of little children's rattles, because quite often in physical mediumship, you'll have spirit children always playing in the room.
Really?
So yeah, absolutely. I've got a wonderful story on that, of experience the spirit children, because they're very naughty, the spirit children. And what I used to happen every night, especially in the winter months, and I'd always wear big thick boots, that would lace up. And usually about halfway through the sitting of an evening, I'd start feeling these hands tugging at the laces on my boots.
Wow.
And with such force, I have to tell you, that they would undo the laces on my boots and pull my boot off my foot, and throw it somewhere in the room.
Really?
And that was, yeah, absolutely. And that was the spirit children doing that. Or one of their other favorite tricks, without me knowing, was they used to untie the laces on both of my boots without me knowing they'd done it. And they would then tie them together so that when I stood up, I would go to take a step. All of those, they were the sort of games that happened regularly in the room once the phenomena had got going. And one of the most memorable occasions was when we'd started to get the spirit children in this room, which was about a year and a half in to developing, and we'd already started to get ectoplasmic hands, or hands formed, proper hands formed out of ectoplasm, and come in to touch us.
They just
So they would
float unattached.
Yeah. So they would come from the medium's body. So the ectoplasm would come out. And ectoplasm can take all sorts of forms. It can sometimes be like misty, or look like a soft material in a lower state of formation. But they can also form it to be quite hard and solid, so to like I'll talk a little bit about ectoplasmic rods. Rods are what they use to levitate the object. So they basically build what's known as rods out of ectoplasm, like steel rods, solid rods that are, that can hold big things
Like
up in the
rebar,
room.
kind of.
Absolutely,
Okay.
just like that. So it can be soft, it can be hard, like that, depending on what they need it for. But they'd started bringing ectoplasm out of the medium, out through the cabinet. So often physical mediums will sit inside a cabinet, which essentially is like a wardrobe. I think you call them wardrobes in America, without the doors on the front. So you'd sit in that with a curtain on, and that's to contain the energy.
Okay.
So the ectoplasm would come out, and they'd start forming different things. But we started to get formation of ectoplasmic hands. So they would come and pat us on the head. like a big man's hand or something like that. And then they'd pat us with a little lady's hand, or they'd stroke our faces. And it felt completely like a normal hand. Sometimes it felt cold, or sometimes it felt a bit moist. You know what I mean? Like it had been dipped in water or something. But the best experience was, and I remember it very well because it was in the summer and I'd had a pair of shorts on, and I suddenly felt this little tap on my knee. And I had a bare knee, of course, at the time, on my bare knee. And whenever they tapped us, it was to put your hands out. They used to teach us to put our hands out like that. If they tapped us or wanted us to put our hands out, they would just give us a tap. And I put my hands out, and this tiny hand
Oh,
that could only have been the hand of a 2-year-old was put on mine, and it wrapped around each of my fingers, the most, and I will never forget that experience because it blew my mind, and was also incredibly emotional to feel this beautiful child's hand. And it went round to all three of us. There were 3 sitters, and all 3 of us experienced it that night, which was an incredible thing. I've also had spirit lips materialize, the lips of my father in spirit, to kiss me on the face, to kiss me
oh.
on the cheek. So that was another mind-blowing experience.
That
Yeah,
was like what I was just going to ask you. Why are they doing this? And it's to touch us, to because they can't in spirit world
abs-
unless they do it this way. That's
absolutely,
remarkable.
absolutely. And the other things that they can do, or the other type of experiences that I had. I mean, I know I consider myself to be incredibly fortunate to have witnessed all of this, and seen it week in, week out. Seen it week in, week out. But another thing that they are fabulous at doing is materializing objects into the room that
That's
shouldn't be
you
there.
read my mind because I was just going to say, can you talk about what
Ah,
do they call that? Apports?
apports, yeah.
Apports.
So they're known as apports, and essentially an apport is an object that's materialized into the room. And wow, I have to say, it was about a year in before we started getting any. And to start off with, they used to take the seance trumpet up to the cabinet. They'd hold it there with ectoplasm, and then they'd levitate it across the room to you. They'd tap you on the hand with the trumpet, which was your way of saying, put your hands out. They'd then tip the trumpet up, and you'd hear something come down inside the trumpet. And then you'd have an object in your hand. And of course, because it was a dark seance room, you couldn't see it until it was time to finish. I mean, so you could sit there for an hour knowing like, they've given me something, I've got no idea what it is. And we ended up getting a tin in the end, just a small tin for all the apports. And I know that the medium has still got this tin from all the years of apports that we had into the
So
room.
what were
Um,
some of these?
Oh, well, we had some wonderful. We had lots of little pieces of jewelry apported into that. We were all ladies that sat as well, so we got jewelry. And there was one night where one of the sitters, called Judy, she was apported a silver J pendant that was given to her. We used to get a lot of old coins. I think one of the oldest coins we had was dated back to 1500 and something. And we had to do a lot of research to find this coin because we couldn't even find it like in any of the history pages, in any of the archaeological pages. We found it eventually, and it was incredibly rare. We've had all sorts crystals. They often apport crystals. And when I got one of my specific apports, some of you may be familiar. I was doing a lot of studying with crystals and crystal healing at the time, and I was on the lookout to track down a Herkimer diamond. Some of you may be familiar with a Herkimer diamond, and I hadn't said to anybody, but in the week before Circle, I'd been like, oh, I must try and find a Herkimer diamond. I needed it for something I was doing, and that week in Circle, they gave me a Herkimer diamond. So that
Wow.
wasn't just going, oh, we can do this, but that was saying, we know exactly what you want. And that was always the message that we had from the spirit team that worked with the group was, not only are we with you, of course, on these nights when we meet to do this work, we are with you 24/7.
Hmm.
And I wish I could put into words the what happens with a group of people when you sit for that type of development. You build such a close bond, because what spirit need to do with you all is to harmonize all of your energy. And I always see it as being literally melded together. And once you've had that relationship and experienced this type of thing with a group of people, you form a very special bond indeed.
Yes.
And also with the spirit team that are working with you. So, and it was real proof to me, like, you really are with us at every single moment. So we had a huge load of apports into the room.
Wow.
And there was a couple of old physical mediums who used to apport literally hundreds upon hundreds of flowers into the room. That was another one where they'd have piles and piles of flowers. All sorts of crazy things have been apported into rooms. And they can also be dematerialized as well. So things can be taken from the room and put somewhere else outside of the seance room. So that's very common. Yeah, it's a very common phenomenon.
Fascinating.
And the levitation, was also great because, I've seen big solid tables that you could probably just about lift yourself, be lifted straight up in the air and stuck to the ceiling. And, you'd sit there thinking, they've put the table up there. And I just used to sit there and think, please bring that down gently. Please don't drop it. Because sometimes when they were practicing things and holding things with the ectoplasmic rods, they'd lose control and things would drop, and I used to be like, please don't drop that table. But what always amazed me, and of course it wasn't for them, it wasn't the fact they were in the dark. Of course, they don't need dark or light to see. But it was their precision of everything they moved. They knew where everything in that room was to the millimeter.
Wow.
So if they were moving things around or if they were doing things, it was just phenomenal.
Hazel,
phenomenal.
what would be the purpose of putting the table up against the ceiling? Why would they do that?
It's just their way. It's literally just their way of showing what they can do.
Oh, okay.
So it's their way of saying, this is what's possible. Do you know what I mean? All of these things are possible. And for me, because of course, physical mediumship to me does prove survival of death, because that's spirit doing all of this and creating all of this wonderful energy. But what I think it is as well is I think that there is a secondary thing when spirit are doing things like physical phenomena, we get to experience them. I think it's there for people to really start to understand that what we know about what is possible in this world is that much.
Yeah.
And that's also why I think. So it's not actually just about spiritualism. I think that spirit in their infinite intelligence, of course, it's like they're saying, if this is possible, what else is?
Mm-hmm.
And I think to me that's a really underlying message that maybe not everybody gets in physical mediumship, but it certainly struck a chord with me, which was, well, if I've witnessed all of this, which I would never have dreamed was possible, what else is possible? And I think what that does, then it opens the mind in such a way, or opens your eyes in such a way, you can never shut that door.
You can't go back.
You cannot go back through it. Once you've experienced that, there's no denying it. And I think it really helps people, or shows people that there is so much that is possible that we have no understanding of, or or yet we have no understanding of yet. And I think that really ties into your orb photography as well, Nancy, because that in itself is physical phenomena.
Mm-hmm.
As you said, and had somebody have said to you that was possible for you before you'd experienced it for yourself, you'd probably have gone, I don't think so.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, of course, you get, and I'm sure, like me, once it's out the box, it can't go back in the box.
No. Once you see it, once you experience it.
Absolutely. And then, but then, of course, you start thinking, well, what else is possible?
Yeah.
What
Well,
else?
we're expanded. It's like you can't put the toothpaste back in that same tube because it's
really
grown, So
You really
where
can't.
how do you see physical mediumship with today? And do you see a future for it?
Yeah, so there are a few physical mediums, or people who badging themselves up as physical mediums. If I'm totally honest, and I always am, there's no one demonstrating at the moment that I would advocate anybody going to see as being producing real, constant, genuine phenomena. So do I think there's a future for it? I really don't know, because I believe, I mean, it's died off so much anyway in the last 30, 40 years, to minimal groups and people sitting. I think there is in the spiritualist movement, there's still a big interest in it, but it's so much harder now to get dedicated sitters because, again, we're all busy, we work, and we do all those things as well. So it's really hard to do that. But not only that, I know that there are lots of good circles and physical mediums happening all over the world, but they don't come out and they don't demonstrate publicly, which I do understand, because until we start to simply, call out and get rid of the people who are giving physical mediumship a bad name, which always happens. It's not a new phenomenon. When I talk about it, I'm like, this is not new. It's nothing new. This has gone on since the beginning of time. Where there is a chance to make money or for ego to gain, success, there will be trickery. That's just how human behavior is. So I do think the future is limited. But I don't believe that the spirit world will ever allow this type of phenomena to die off. I think, if anything, what they're desperately trying to do, and I know that they're trying to do this, is to evolve it in a way so that it's more accessible, or that more people, if you like, can do it. I believe that they'll try and make it easier, if you like, for people to sit for physical mediumship. That's what I believe they'll be doing, or they've already started doing that.
Oh, okay. Oops.
It's but that's like anything in life, isn't it? If you want it badly enough, you're going to dedicate and devote your time to it. But I'm really happy if anyone who's listening to the show, who's listening to it on playback, has got any questions about physical mediumship, I'm more than happy for them to contact me, or because I can happily recommend books, great websites, you know what I mean, things like that.
And how do they reach you?
Absolutely. So they can either message me or go to my website, which is www.hazel-martin.com.
Okay.
And on there, actually, it's probably easier if they message me from there rather than giving another email address. Or they can message me or email me from there and just say, "Hey, I'm interested. I'd love to know more." I'd be more than happy. It's my passion, so I'll talk to anybody.
Okay.
But it's also hard to find the stuff as well sometimes.
Yeah.
So more than happy to help out.
Now, are you writing a memoir?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Well, let us know when it comes out. But in
do.
the meantime, I do highly recommend this book. It's just called Alec Harris. And he was kind of a reluctant physical medium. He didn't know he was.
No.
Fascinating. So I have like 3 minutes, but I did want to say, Tara, one of the listeners wrote in and she said she has substance sometimes coming out of her index finger and wants to talk to you about it. So if you can contact Hazel, then maybe she can help you with that.
Please do.
So because I have like 2.5 minutes, so I did sit this morning, as a matter of fact, with my guide, Leonini, and I asked her for a message for the podcast. Now, when Leonini starts the message, she always shows me an image first. And the image that she showed me, for my younger viewers, I might have to show a picture, is an old Rolodex. And the old Rolodex used to be where you kept everybody's phone numbers and contacts, right? But that's the image that she showed me. So here's her message. Today, we want to talk to you about the Rolodex of your thoughts. The old Rolodex system held cards of information and contacts you could easily access over and over again by turning that dial. So what is the Rolodex of thoughts? It is a filing system of sorts that you create with each and every thought and reaction. These are categorized and filed away into the thought system for reference. Each time you are confronted with a situation, your mind researches your Rolodex to see how to react. It says your mind, even your body, refers to the familiar because you are pulling out the same reaction card each time from your Rolodex. It is now time to purge that Rolodex and make room for new cards. new cards of new thoughts and patterns. Think about the cards you have put in your Rolodex. Are the cards tattered and worn and out of date? Is it time to create new cards with new beliefs and patterns that you have come to know will serve you better? It is easy to change a card in that old Rolodex system. The same can be said when you decide to change your old pattern of reacting. Simply turn that dial from J for judgment to C for compassion. So that was her message today. I thought that was really interesting to compare it to an old Rolodex. So because we were talking about transformation and metamorphosis, I have my butterfly cards, which represent metamorphosis. So I'm going to draw a card that with my intent is for everybody listening that can help you along your journey. And I know I have like 1 minute, Chris. I'm moving. I could have, Hazel, you're going to have to come back, please. This was so fascinating. And there's so much more to talk about.
Oh,
Just,
yes.
just incredible. I mean, talk about when you have to know about, oh, and I will do that last photo, Chris. So here's my card. And the card says, it says hobbies. So if you are not doing hobbies, if you are not being creative, now is the time. It balances that right and left brain. So here's my final picture. And the teal color is Robbie's color. It says the spiritual world is hidden and the spiritual world is hidden and perfectly revealed in the physical world. So that was by a man named Richard Rohr, and he was a Franciscan monk. I'm sure I'm taking his quote out of context, but I thought how beautiful the spiritual world reveals itself in physical mediumship. So thank you, Chris. So Hazel, I want to thank you again for taking the time to be with us today. Fascinating conversation. And again, if they want to get a hold of you, it's Hazel-Martin at .com.
Yeah.
All
absolutely. Right. And thanks so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Hazel. Take care, everybody. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.